Alright guys, today I'm going to give you my 5 favorite budget decks and you can use them to dominate your opponents. So the first deck we're going to talk about is a grass type budget deck. The main point about this deck is to use Lilligant to progress into your stage 2 so you can use your stage 2 to dominate. In this version of the deck we're going to be using Vileplume, but if you want you can use Venusaur. So taking a look at the deck list, you can see we are running Oddish, Petilil, Lilligant, and Vileplume as well as Gloom. Those are going to be the main Pokemons we are using. The expensive card in quotation mark would be the Vileplume, but you have Lilligant and Petilil, so those are pretty cheap, but growing into this Vileplume is a must. You want to get Lilligant as soon as you can so you can develop your Vileplume. So once you get the Vileplume out, you have a chance to knock out most EXs if you are lucky with the sleep. Now taking a look at the trainers, we're running 1 Potion, 2 XP, 2 Pokeball, 2 Professor's Research, 2 Erica, and a Giovanni. Erica is one of the reasons why these grass decks are really strong, healing 50 plus having that potion meaning 70 damage when your opponent's banking on trying to knock out your opponent is absolutely huge. And honestly, I think this deck is very strong, especially with the Vileplume. Vileplume has a huge upside to be able to knock out a lot of Pokemon, especially when you get them asleep. Getting a Pokemon asleep is huge. They can't do anything and you can knock them out, and that's why I like this deck. The second deck I'm going to talk about today is the Water Budget deck. This deck is very strong and it revolves around Tentacruel as well as having Greninja finishing them off. Taking a look at the deck list, you can see we're running the Tentacool and Tentacruel as well as the Froakie, Frogadier, and Greninja line. Now the reason, like I mentioned, that this deck is so strong is that Tentacruel's ability is very good. 110 health, which is nice because a lot of Pokemon will deal 50 damage, so you're going to be out of those 2 hit range, but the important part is Poison Tentacle. Your opponent's going to be poisoned, you're going to deal 50 damage, so meaning you can deal 70 damage basically, and then with Greninja you can finish them off. Greninja's attack is not amazing, but the Water Shuriken is, so you're able to get the Tentacruel out, deal a lot of damage, and finish them off for Greninja and Poison. Taking a look at the trainer, you can see we're running 2 Potions, 2 XP, 2 Pokeball, 2 Professor's Research, 1 Sabrina, and 1 Giovanni. I like running 1 Sabrina, 1 Giovanni because Giovanni gives you the opportunity to knock out those opponents that you typically would not be able to. And really the only expensive card is the Greninja. Getting a Greninja is going to be tough, but I can see Greninja being used in multiple other higher end decks. But the Tentacruel is very cheap and one of the stronger stage 1s in the game. Honestly, a lot of stage 1s in every single type are very strong, and this is the one for the water deck, and that's why I use this water budget deck. And the third deck we're using is going to be a poison budget deck. Honestly, this is one of the stronger decks, and it's fairly cheap. There is going to be no stage 2 and only stage 1s, but the main point of this deck is you're going to be using Arbok and Weezing to try to devastate your opponents. So Weezing is very strong because of Ghastly. The ability to make your opponent poison right off the bat is strong. Not only that, if you go first, you can actually get Weezing on your second turn, tackle, and deal a bunch of damage, which I think is a huge momentum swing. And speaking of momentum swing, Arbok is fantastic. Another stage 1 that I think is highly underrated, but so very strong. First of all, you're dealing 60 damage for 2 energy. 100 life is kind of borderline bad, but I still like this card. Now, the best part is that your opponent cannot retreat, meaning that if your opponent was banking on swapping out a Pokemon, Arbok is huge. Now, the reason this deck is also very strong is because of Koga. I'm going to talk about a synergy a little bit later, but let me talk about the trainers real quick. We got 2 Potions, 2 XPs, 2 Pokeball, 2 Professor's Research. We got 2 Kogas, 1 Sabrina, and 1 Giovanni. Now, Koga is actually fantastic. One of the main reasons this deck works so well is that you get to swap out your Muck or Weezing from the active spot. Now this is important because not only do you get a free retreat, meaning that you can bring out, let's say, an Arbok, but you also get to rotate. If your opponent is about to kill your Weezing, you can swap out the Weezing, rotate the Weezing onto your bench, bring out the Arbok, and Arbok will be able to finish the job. Now the synergy with Koga is amazing. Like I mentioned, if you bring out Weezing on turn 2, hit your opponent with the Poison Gas, hit them to tackle. The next turn you bring out the Arbok, get the free swap because of Koga, cornered them, they're not going to be able to swap out and you're going to get free knockout. It's a very strong deck and very cheap to make. And that's why I love this poison budget deck. Now the next deck is going to be a Dragonite budget deck. Honestly, there's no such thing as a non-budget deck for Dragonite because the whole point of the deck is a Dragonite and there's no EX Dragonite. But it is an incredibly strong deck. Matter of fact, if they ever did tournaments where they would ban EXs, this would be probably one of the best deck in the meta. Now taking a look at the deck list, we are running Snom and Frostnom. Now the reason you're using those is because you're trying to stall out your opponent. The whole point of your deck is to stall out your opponent so you can develop your Dragonite and then destroy your opponent's field. Now, Draco Meteor is an incredible attack. It is expensive, so it does take a little bit of time to develop. However, dealing 50 damage to 4 random targets, even the bench, is game-changing. You could potentially knock out your opponent's bench and win the game. Now, the biggest downside is random. Your opponent can potentially have an Oddish on the bench, take all 200 damage, which is devastating. But it is a very strong attack. Taking a look at the rest of the trainers, we're running Potion, XP, Pokeball, 1 red card, Professor's Research, and a Giovanni. Potentially speaking, if you want, you can put Sabrina as a red card, but I found that I don't need Sabrina because Dragonite can hit anything on the bench, so Sabrina doesn't matter as much. And honestly, this deck does take a little bit of time to develop, which means it's on the slower end, which is why it's a tougher deck to kind of use. But once you get it going, Dragonite will single-handedly win your deck, and that's why I really like this Dragon budget deck. So the fifth and final deck is going to be a Fire budget deck. Honestly, this deck is absolutely incredible, and not only that, it is so cheap. This is fast and cheap, and you can dominate this. If there was a rank mode, I would be using this right off the bat to get as high as I can, because this can dominate a lot of decks. But let's talk about the deck list. So we are going to be running Ponyta, Vulpix, as well as Ninetale and Rapidash. Like I mentioned, there's only stage 1s in this deck, which is why this is super fast. Not only that, if you take a look at Ninetale, Ninetale's attack is incredible. 90 damage for 2 energy is already incredible, but there's another card that makes this even over the top. Now, Rapidash is the second Pokemon we're using, very strong. 40 damage for 1 energy is already good, and 100 health, and it's a stage 1, so getting that early on means you can apply a lot of pressure. Then our trainers are typical ones. You have Potion, X-Speed, Pokeball, Professor's Research, but here's an important one. Blaine. Blaine is the biggest reason this deck is so strong. Your Rapidash and your Ninetale deal an extra 30 damage, meaning your Ninetale can deal 120 damage, which will knock out a lot of Pokemons, and your Rapidash will deal 70 damage, which can knock out a lot of basic Pokemons out of the game. We're also running 2 Sabrinas in case your opponent swaps out so you can finish off the job, but like I said, this deck is so incredibly fast. You can deal ridiculous amount of damage with the Ninetales. Not only that, you have Rapidash. If you want, you can maybe try to Magmar, but I found that this deck is the best deck that I've used, and honestly, this is my favorite budget deck out there. Before we leave, I want to give you guys a few decks that I kind of tested that were on the fence or I haven't been able to use. Like the first one here, we have this Kabutops deck and the Trio. I honestly find this deck incredible, just due to the fact that the Kabutops ability Life Leech is huge, but then again, I don't think you can use this in other decks. We're also running Dugtrio, and also there's a variant of this deck that uses Sandslash. I think Sandslash is really strong and very aggressive, as well as Golem. I think you can do a version of the deck with Golem and Sandslash. Because of a Brock, you can get the Golem to do a lot of damage late end while having a Sandslash, but I don't own any Golem, so I couldn't test that out. We also have a budget lightning deck. Instead of using the Pikachu, you run the Magneton as well as the Raichu with what's his name, Lieutenant Surge, but I don't have the Magneton, so right now I couldn't test that out, but I have a feeling that that deck is really strong because it's going to be really aggressive because of just Electrode being a fantastic Pokemon. Not only do you get the free retreat, you can also eventually swap out the Raichu, use the Electric Surge or Lieutenant Surge to knock out some bigger Pokemons. But like I mentioned, right now this is the EX expensive version of it, but I do think that the budget version of it could be very strong. And I want to bring up this Nidoqueen, Nidoking deck. I know a lot of people might want to use them, and I did make a video about it. I do think it's strong, but it's not as good as any of the other budget decks, so I don't recommend building it just because it is expensive to build these Nidoking, Nidoqueens. You have to get all 3 of them. I just think it's better to use your resources otherwhere. So those are going to be all the budget decks that I recommend, and honestly, I think there's going to be other decks out there that people can be used, so let me know in the comments down below what is your favorite deck that you have been using. But honestly, those are the ones I use, and I think there is a lot of upsides on a lot of the other energy. I think Colorless has a budget deck that you can probably build. I think Colorless for sure has one. You have Farfetch, you also have Snorlax if you wanted to kind of stall, but you have the Pidgeot, so you can definitely make some decks with those. I think Colorless highly underrated. I've used them earlier on, but these newer decks that I've been building have been incredible. But you guys let me know in the comments down below. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.